The first thing I heard was chains, metal on pavement, that ugly, slow scrape that says, something expensive is about to become someone else's problem, and it was happening in my driveway at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday, like the universe had decided caffeine wasn't enough of a wake-up call. I'd been half asleep, brain still floating in that, maybe it's the garbage truck fog, when the sound got sharper, hydraulics whining, steel clinking, the kind of organized chaos tow trucks make when they're working fast and confident. I stumbled to the window, blinked twice, and there it was, a flatbed parked like it owned the place, and a guy in a fluorescent vest was already under my 1972 Ford Highboy, hooking chains to the frame like he was harvesting a crop. My truck, my restored, cherry-red, show-clean Highboy that I'd spent 3 years rebuilding piece by piece, the kind of project that eats your weekends, your knuckles, and a truly irresponsible amount of money. I didn't even put shoes on. I pulled on jeans, grabbed my phone, hit record without thinking, and walked straight outside into air cold enough to make my breath look like smoke. The driver didn't notice me at first. He was locked in, chain here, ratchet there, that practiced rhythm. I kept my voice calm on purpose, because I'd learned a long time ago that the second you yell, you become the problem in everyone's story. "Morning," I said like we were neighbors chatting over a fence. "Can I ask what you're doing with my truck?" He jolted a little, looked up like he'd just realized houses come with owners. Mid-30s, patchy beard, tired eyes. He had that look of a guy who wakes up every day hoping for normal, and keeps getting weird instead. "I got a work order," he said, and he waved a clipboard like it was a hall pass. "HOA authorized tow." "HOA authorized," I repeated slow. "Can I see the authorization?" He hesitated, just a beat, and started to pull the paper out of the cab, and that's when I heard her voice, sharp and bright behind me, like a fork hitting a dinner plate. "You don't get to see anything," she said. I turned, and there she was, our HOA president, except she didn't act like the president of a homeowners association. She acted like the mayor of a small country. Late 50s, perfectly pressed pantsuit even at dawn, hair set like it had its own budget. Clipboard in hand, always, like it was a weapon. She looked thrilled. Not concerned, not professional, not let's resolve this. Thrilled, like she'd been waiting all week for a reason to swing a hammer. "This is official HOA business," she continued, stepping closer, smiling with that smug little caught-you energy. "Your violation of community standards has gone on long enough." I kept my tone steady. "Morning. I'm asking to see the written authorization for towing my vehicle from my property." "Your property is part of this community," she said, and she didn't even blink. "That vehicle violates Section 4.7, Commercial Vehicles and Eyesores." Eyesore. About a truck that had placed second at a classic show 6 months earlier. I almost laughed, but I didn't give her the satisfaction. "I'd still like to see the bylaw you're citing," I said, and the board-approved tow order. That last part mattered. HOAs can't just freestyle. There's supposed to be notice, a vote, due process, at least in theory. She looked irritated, like I'd asked her to show her work on a math problem. She shoved a folded paper toward me. I unfolded it, and it was basically a 3-paragraph essay she had typed up that morning with today's date stamped at the top like it made it real. Emergency amendment to enforce aesthetic standards. Emergency. Like my truck was a wildfire. I stared at it, then looked up. "So this is something you wrote?" "It is an emergency amendment," she snapped. "I'm the president. I can act to protect property values." "Even if that were true," I said, still calm, "you'd need to explain the emergency. A truck parked in a driveway isn't a flood." The tow driver had stopped working. He was watching us like a tennis match, head turning back and forth, hoping somebody would call it off. "Sir," he said quietly to me, "management company said it was authorized. I'm just doing my job." "I get that," I told him. "But you might want to call your supervisor before you take it any further. There's a liability issue here." That's when she actually laughed. Like a cartoon villain. "Liability?" she said. "You signed the HOA agreement when you bought the house. You follow the rules. If you don't like it, take it up at the next board meeting." And that's the moment the polite part of me clocked out. "I didn't sign anything," I said, "because my property isn't in your HOA." The silence after that was gorgeous. The kind of silence you can hear. The tow driver's eyes widened. The president's mouth actually opened like her brain needed a second to reload. "That's absurd," she finally said. "Every house in this development is in the HOA. It's in the deeds." "Not mine," I said. "This was a farmhouse on acreage before your development existed. The HOA formed later." The previous owner refused to join. I have the deed and survey to prove it. Her face drained a shade, then flared back into angry red like a malfunctioning traffic light. That can't be right, she said, voice rising. I would have been informed. Apparently not, I said, and I turned to the tow driver. If you tow my truck off land that isn't under their jurisdiction, based on a fake authorization, your company is going to have a very bad day. He pulled out his phone and walked a few steps away, talking low. I watched his shoulders tighten as the conversation went on, his head nodding faster, his free hand gesturing like, "Are you kidding me?" When he came back, his whole posture had changed. Not casual anymore. Now he looked like a guy who just realized he's standing on a trapdoor. "Ma'am," he said to her, "my supervisor says I can't complete this tow. There's a legal issue. I need to unhook and leave." "You absolutely will not," she hissed, suddenly shrill. "I authorized it." "Ma'am," he said, firmer now, "I do not have authority to tow from property that isn't under your HOA. My legal department is involved. I'm unhooking." She turned on me like I'd personally insulted her ancestors. "You think you're clever? You think you can just flaunt rules everyone else has to follow?" And right there, in the cold morning air, I realized something that still makes me laugh. Some people don't actually care about rules. They care about control. Rules are just the costume. I said, I can do what I want on property I own free and clear without interference from an organization I never joined. She stormed off toward her house 3 doors down, blazer flapping like she was leaving a courtroom. The tow driver apologized about 4 times while unhooking my truck, then got out of there fast, like the neighborhood itself was contagious. I went back inside, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table staring at the steam curling off the mug because I knew deep down this wasn't over. People like her don't take no and suddenly develop hobbies. The previous owner had warned me when I bought the place. Older guy, lived there forever. He told me the development had been built around the farmhouse, and the developer tried to buy him out. He refused. When they formed the HOA, they tried to rope him in. He hired a lawyer, pointed at his deed like it was a shield, and the HOA backed off for a while. They'd nitpicked his fence, mailbox, garden, anything they could reach. Every time, he reminded them, not your jurisdiction. And every time, they'd slink away. Apparently, the new president either didn't know or didn't believe in geography. So I did what I always do when someone tries to turn my life into paperwork. I created a folder. Date, survey, truck title, registration, everything. I called the non-emergency police line and asked for an officer to document an attempted unauthorized tow. An hour later, a young officer showed up, took notes, looked at the emergency amendment like it was a middle school permission slip, and told me, "This is civil, but I'll write a report. You may want a lawyer." Then I called the tow company's main office. The manager sounded genuinely horrified, like, "Please don't say my company did what I think it did." He asked for copies of my deed and survey, and I emailed them on the spot. Then I called the HOA management company, the one that collects dues, runs meetings, pretends to be professional. I explained calmly that their HOA president had tried to tow my vehicle off private property that wasn't even in the association, using a paper she typed up herself. They put me on hold long enough that I started refilling my coffee, just to have something to do. 45 minutes later, I got a call from a regional director. Different tone entirely, no fluff, no let's circle back, just quiet seriousness. He said, "I reviewed your records. You're correct. Your property is not part of the HOA. I'm very sorry. This should have been caught." Then he said the words I wanted to hear. "Our insurance carrier has been notified." And that's when the chessboard flipped. Because HOAs love acting tough until insurance gets involved. Insurance doesn't care about ego. It cares about liability, and liability hates HOA presidents with clipboards and delusions. He asked if I'd incurred any costs. I looked out the window at my truck sitting there, innocent as a puppy. "Well," I said, chains were on the frame. "This is a restored classic vehicle. I need a specialist inspection to document no damage, and I'll need the report for insurance." He didn't even argue. "Completely understandable," he said, like he was swallowing panic. "Send us the quote." So the next day I drove the high boy to a shop that specializes in classic Fords. The mechanic spent 3 hours combing every inch, frame, suspension, steering, taking photos like we were preparing evidence for court. In the end, he said it looked fine, no damage, but he wrote a detailed report anyway. The bill was $800. I emailed the report, photos, and receipt to the regional director, and I added one more line item. For hours of my time and disruption at $100 an hour. I wasn't trying to get rich. I was trying to make it sting just enough to be remembered. He called me that afternoon and agreed to pay it, $200 total, and he told me the HOA board was holding an emergency meeting. Here comes the twist I didn't expect. 3 days later, I got a call from an HOA board member, guy about 5 houses down, always seemed decent at neighborhood events. He sounded embarrassed. He said, "We didn't know your property wasn't in the HOA. The president, she acted on her own. We voted unanimously to remove her as president and censure her. She created serious liability for the association." I sat there, phone to my ear, and almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly human. The loudest person in the room always convinces themselves they're the board, until the actual board gets a bill. I told him honestly, as long as you all leave me alone, I'm not looking to start a war. He sounded relieved, like he'd been holding his breath for days. A week later, a check showed up. I deposited it. I figured it was done. Of course it wasn't done because she wasn't done. 2 weeks after she got booted, I'm out washing the truck on a Saturday morning, sunny, warm, perfect day. I had the engine idling, because I like letting that old V8 warm up. The rumble is comforting. It's a living sound, like the truck is reminding you it survived 5 decades and still has teeth. And then I see her marching down the street, no blazer this time, but still moving like a woman on a mission. She stops at the end of my driveway and shouts over the engine, "You need to turn that off. Noise ordinance. No loud machinery before 9 a.m. I checked my watch, 10:30. I didn't argue. I just looked at her, looked at the watch, then kept washing. "Did you hear me?" she yelled louder, like volume creates authority. I turned off the hose and walked closer, but didn't step off my property. "I heard you. It's 10:30. Also, county ordinance is an HOA law. And even if it were an HOA rule, it still wouldn't apply to me." Her face did that same red flash thing again. "You think you're special because you have some old piece of paper." "It's called a deed," I said. "And yet it means your rules aren't my rules." She tried one last Hail Mary about community responsibilities, about me being selfish, about property values like my truck was a virus. And I realized, quietly, almost sadly, that this wasn't about my truck at all. It was about her needing a world where everyone around her is required to obey. That's the part people don't tell you about power. Real power is usually boring, procedural, accountable. The flashy, angry kind is often just insecurity wearing a badge. A month later, I got a cease and desist letter from a law firm, citing HOA rules and threatening action if I didn't remove the truck. I read it twice, then called the attorney. Calm voice, polite words, same approach as before. "My property isn't in the HOA. I can email you the deed and survey right now." Long pause. "Please do," he said. I sent it while we were on the phone. I heard the faint click of keys, the silence of him reading. Then finally, he exhaled and said, "It appears my client was mistaken about jurisdiction. I apologize. Please disregard the letter." I asked, "Was your client the former HOA president?" Another pause, longer. "I'll be reviewing my relationship with this client," he said, voice suddenly tired. "You won't be hearing from us again." I called the current HOA president after that. He sounded angry at her, not me. He said she'd been explicitly told to stop. He said they were looking at whether she could be held personally responsible for wasting legal fees. And that was it. The storm finally passed. These days I still see her sometimes. She doesn't make eye contact. The clipboard is gone. My truck is still right where it belongs, my driveway. Every morning, weather permitting, I start it up and let it idle a few minutes before I head out. Not to be petty, but I won't lie, the timing is satisfying. And last month, I put up a full-size flagpole in the front yard, about 30 feet tall, bright aluminum in the sun, absolutely not in keeping with neighborhood aesthetics. The kind of thing an HOA president would have had a stroke over. They can't do a thing about it. Here's the lesson I didn't understand when I was younger. Most conflicts aren't won by being the loudest, or the toughest, or the meanest. They're won by being the most prepared. The deed, the survey, the paper trail, the calm voice while someone else spirals. Because the world has a weird way of rewarding the person who stays steady, while someone else tries to play king on land they don't own. And karma doesn't always show up as lightning from the sky. Sometimes karma is a board meeting, an insurance carrier, and a check that makes someone realize their authority, was just a costume they borrowed. So here's the question that still bugs me. And I want to hear what you think when someone abuses power like that. Do you believe in letting it go once the damage is fixed? Or do you believe they should face personal consequences, even if it turns into a bigger fight? Where's the line between protecting your peace and teaching someone they can't keep doing this to the next person? Drop your take in the comments. Tell me if you think I handled it right, or if you would have gone further, and if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a petty community leader, or anyone who tried to rewrite reality with a clipboard. I want to hear your story too.